So, with gaming, I've always been a generation or two behind. When the GameCube first debuted, I was still playing the SNES. When the Xbox was released, I was still using my PS2. This worked out for me because with every new release, the console and game prices for the last generation would drastically fall. But still, there was always still anticipation to get my hands on the next console and experience all the new games I've been missing out on. With that said, the latest generation of consoles have left me relatively underwhelmed. Where new console releases and announcements of exclusives once evoked a sense of excitement,
I'm here for the PlayStation 2, the best entertainment system to hit the world. It's gonna be great.
It's a next evolution of PlayStation, and they're doing it right from the beginning. Backward compatibility, allowing you to play the old games, so your PlayStation doesn't die. You don't have to buy new game cartridges.
3, 2, 1.
I now find myself wondering what new ways companies will come up with to screw over the consumer. When the Xbox One was first announced, gamers were outraged over Microsoft's confusing DRM restrictions. Initially, publishers would dictate whether trade-ins for new games were allowed and designate what outlets you could bring them to. You couldn't lend a physical game to a friend. Additionally, you had to connect your Xbox to internet regularly so your activity could be monitored. While Microsoft rolled back these decisions, the fact that they felt so emboldened to begin with foreshadowed what was to come later on. Today, we see Nintendo employing many anti-consumer practices, such as selling game key cards, replacing the virtual console with an online subscription, and remotely disabling modified consoles due to user agreement revisions. Anytime where gaming is played by a slew of issues to undermine the enjoyment of the medium, the straightforward simplicity of retro consoles has become increasingly commendable. Without the need for updates or internet connection, you can plug in a console from decades past and recapture the same experience of gaming from that time. Despite being low-tech by today's standards, these consoles reflect an era where media ownership had some meaning. During this period, you could expect to buy a finished product without subscription fees or microtransactions. This isn't exclusive to gaming, and it applies to almost all media now. For example, this year, Amazon made the executive decision to restrict local backups of Kindle books, forcing users to access content only through a Wi-Fi connected device. While Kindle only ever offered digital licensing, not actual ownership, the ability to download books gave a stronger impression of consumer control. The promise of greater convenience through the rapid transition to digital has ushered in a new era where companies have a stronghold over consumers. You can have your opinions about physical formats. Without a doubt, they do have their limitations. Regardless, there is reliability in being able to play a DVD or a Blu-ray. Instead of hoping companies will make movies or shows accessible without requiring the consumer to jump through hoops or continuously pay for the same things over and over again. Imagine my surprise when a good portion of Nickelodeon shows, once available through Paramount Plus on Amazon, were moved to BET, or how HBO no longer has certain classic Cartoon Network shows like the original Powerpuff Girls or Ed, Edd and Eddy. And that's not even mentioning the movies and shows that aren't available through legitimate means. You need a pirate hat to get them. What's especially eerie in this age of increased digitization and surveillance capitalism is the prospect of AI being used as a tool to facilitate anti-consumer practices. Already, companies are employing AI-driven personalized pricing, which means it tracks users' data and changes prices in real time to influence purchasing decisions. It should go without saying how damaging such tactics can be to more vulnerable consumers who are prone to impulse buying, or how a lack of transparency can make it difficult to determine when a price of an item is actually fair. Because of this, recent advancements have led me to reconsider the meaning of progress, who gets to dictate it, and why it feels more like a tsunami than a wave. This phenomenon manifests itself in various ways, but changes in the media landscape are where these issues first became much more apparent to me. The irony of the situation is that we felt so burdened by the simple task of putting a disc into a tray that we somehow made made the convenient alternative more convoluted, frustrating, and expensive than what it's sought to replace. When first scripting this video, I was unsure how it would be received. For frequent viewers, you are likely familiar with my affinity for physical media. This preference is not strictly practical, but during the transitional period to digital media platforms, I recall a torrent of criticisms levied at those who were reluctant to make the switch. Those who warned that digital only would inevitably screw over consumers were often disregarded as paranoid alarmists. However, if you spent any time in the comment sections on YouTube, you have likely seen the infamous Clippy popping up more and more frequently. YouTuber and consumer rights activist Louis Rossman made a video encouraging people to change their profile to the 90s computer assistants to demonstrate a unified dissatisfaction with modern company practices.
We all have to get together, and the first step is making it public that we know what's going on. That starts with a Clippy. On YouTube, if you're with me, I ask that you change your profile picture to a Clippy. Clippy just wanted to help. And if you were to turn him on today, unlike most cloud bullshit, he'd still work.
This video discusses a variety of issues, including data collection for predatory advertising, terms of service revisions post-purchase, and ransomware rendering products unstable until the company is paid again. Rossman argues that Clippy, while annoying, was only there to help, not exploit, the customer. So Clippy effectively functions as an app symbol for what is currently lacking in the tech market. While I'm not a tech-savvy person well-informed on every topic covered in that video, I can appreciate its core message, that companies get away with too much, and there needs to be a cultural shift so people can feel empowered to express their discontent and make a change. Currently, for various reasons, a culture overhaul is not only necessary, but kind of inevitable. That's why I shifted much of my channel's focus to discuss culture more directly. What Louis Rossman succeeded in was demonstrate that many more share my sentiments than I initially expected. The focus of this video will not be to persuade people that these issues exist, but rather to expand on these ideas and share my personal perspective on the topic. The ripples of progress have become waves, floods crashing through our lives. All the while, we have no time to think or dissent as we struggle to keep our heads above water in a maelstrom of unbridled advancement threatening to drag us under. However, as we spiral, one thing is evident. Progress appears to follow the same circling pattern. While social progress is often a slow and unstable crawl, subject to debate, stagnation, or even regression, the move towards greater convenience and profit is swift and largely undisputed. From the production advancements of the Industrial Revolution to the digital transition during the information age and the dramatic cultural shift following the advent of social media, such changes appear to be simply inevitable. Those who resist will not hinder nor stop the shifting tides and will be swept up by the undertow if unwilling to adapt. From this reality, curation and comfort have become our conditioning, putting us under willful control. Directly ordering a person to do something will likely result in defiance. However, behaviorism reveals that habits are easy to seamlessly instill so long as they result in an accessible and addictive reward. If a rat can directly stimulate its pleasure center by pushing a lever, it will continue to do so at the expense of its baser needs. The same concept has been applied to consumers to make us more tolerant of changes that reduce our quality of life, uphold the status quo, and make us increasingly dependent on companies. The surveillance capitalism of social media platforms comes to mind here. Sophisticated algorithms are used to predict and manipulate consumer tendencies. As an example of this, Rossman discussed recent accusations of Facebook detecting when young girls delete selfies to determine a possible moment of insecurity, making them more vulnerable to beauty ads. Such predatory algorithmic curation makes our devices feel akin to the operant conditioning chambers used by B.F. Skinner. To understand what drives behaviors in animals, the Harvard psychologist placed creatures such as rats and pigeons in these isolated containers and manipulated their conditions in various ways to influence their actions. For example, a light might flash, prompting the animal to press a lever or a button to receive a reward. In many ways, social media acts as an operant conditioning chamber that aims to encourage increased engagement and time spent on a site. A 2021 study analyzed over 1 million posts from over 4,000 people on various social media platforms and found qualitative and quantitative evidence that human behavior on social media conforms to the principles of reward-based learning. This pattern of social media engagement has been likened to an addiction, in which people are driven to pursue positive online social feedback to the detriment of direct social interaction and even basic needs such as eating or sleeping. Our results provide clear evidence that behavior on social media indeed follows principles of reward maximization, and thereby gives credence to the popular portrayal of social media engagement as a Skinner box for the modern human. Once we have learned to crave what we do not need, we begin to discard what we do need but do not crave. Our independence, privacy, time, and critical thought are often sacrificed for the reward of instant gratification.
Nobody gives a care about the fate of labor as long as they can get their instant gratification.
At the core of the cultural rot lies a conditioned permissive tendency, which has allowed corporate entities to deeply root themselves in every facet of our lives. Now we have become so entangled that we cannot extract ourselves without self-inflicted agony. Samsung is your phone and your fridge. Google is your primary source for information and entertainment. A handful of companies own a bulk of all media. Arguably, consumerist ideals have led us to this outcome. This philosophy teaches that the flow of money is the lifeblood that maintains a healthy economy. Thus, we are encouraged to consume more frequently and to find existential satisfaction in the things we buy. However, as consumers continue to expect less even as they buy more, the fundamental flaws of consumerism become more apparent. Where we were once expected to vote with our wallets, subsequently influencing the market superficially to our benefit, companies have undermined this idealized process. While seemingly recent, this was always the goal. Technically speaking, though you can own a physical version of something, the content itself is licensed to the consumer with limited rights. That's why you see FBI warnings at the beginning of VHS tapes and DVDs. During the time of analog, the main concern was the copying and redistribution of media, resulting in loss of revenue for copyright owners. However, if companies were able to exploit this licensing technicality to force consumers to repurchase content, they would have. And now, that's precisely the reality we live in.
Hey y'all, Scott here. Dumb.
When you buy digital, you are usually only buying a license, which can be revoked for a myriad of reasons. As we transition away from physical formats for more seamless access to the media we love, we were fed breadcrumbs of convenience that led to a trap of dependence. Companies are very much aware of this concept. In behaviorism, response effort acts as a predictor of how likely a subject is to engage in a behavior. In other words, the more ease involved in a behavior, the more frequently it is expected to be performed. Sure, you can go to the store and purchase a physical copy of a movie, or buy it online and wait for it to ship, but why would you go through the trouble when the digital option is just a few clicks away? This level of ease reduces the amount of thought that goes into making a purchasing decision. According to the existing empirical evidence, convenience is a crucial factor in the interaction between consumers and service providers. Customers are more likely to stick around if there is an excess of convenience available. Several investigations have shown that over 50% of internet purchases are done on an impulse. This phenomenon is perfectly exemplified by Uber Eats, which continues to be popular despite being significantly more expensive, and the food is often delivered cold, stale, and with items missing. Companies realize that, for many, the short-term need for convenience often outweighs the benefits of actual ownership. While consumerism encourages us to solve our problems with products, it is adverse to self-determination. The entire point is to make the average person increasingly reliant, so they are much more likely to throw money at the issue and be more tolerant of malignant business practices. We see an endless recurrence of this very effort. Lengthy privacy agreements that no one reads and you're not supposed to read, and social media have made us incrementally accustomed to relinquishing personal information. Cell phones have reduced many of life's needs to a singular device, but have also made us more readily accessible to advertisers. AI can save us time on menial tasks, but our data is used for training in hopes of cutting costs by replacing human contributions. And even indie creators who would often be against such practices fall into the trap of replacing artists with machines, as it was with the case with the 2003 horror movie Late Night with the devil. When big companies set the standard, we begin to wonder sometimes, if they can do this, then why can't I? So everyone ends up losing their integrity. By presenting a change as a matter of fact and getting consumers hooked before they even consider the long-standing consequences, corporations can position themselves as indispensable middlemen, connecting us to conveniences we are unwilling to live without.
The comfort you've demanded is now mandatory. Be happy. At last, everything is done for you.
The result is that they can attain the ability to manipulate behavior and drive the market. They normalize increased control through centralization. Consumer rights are often overlooked or ignored altogether. This is why culture is paramount to this discussion. While it makes sense to want official safeguards to protect consumers, the only shift we can guarantee lies within. The Clippy movement provides the initial step, a collective recognition and a unified goal. However, we cannot hope to shift the culture without introspection and self-transformation. By replacing the consumerist philosophies we have unwittingly perpetuated with something more meaningful, we can set an example that continues to unbind us. In doing so, we may be able to realign the course of progress to something that actually benefits our culture, rather than allowing it to facilitate our own exploitation. So far, the discussion has been heavily focused on the tech and entertainment industries. However, these problems apply to nearly everything we pay for. I've discussed fast fashion several times on my channel and have a dedicated video on the subject if that's something you're interested in. Beyond brands like Temu and Shein, there is a notable decrease in the overall quality of clothing we wear today. As someone who has been thrifting my entire life, I have long learned that if I want to find clothing that is comfortable and will last, I should probably look for skateboarding brands, Army Surplus, or seek out vintage. Of course, this isn't 100% foolproof, but more often than not, if I take the extra time to find something that was made in the 90s or earlier, it will remain a reliable piece in my wardrobe for many years to come. The same cannot be said for something purchased at the local Target, which often fades, frays, and shrinks after a couple of washes. This outcome is not ideal, especially since many modern styles attempt to copy the aesthetic of retro fashion without replicating its quality. Because clothing is something we all use, I hope, this is an issue that should concern us all. But the reasons behind this problem may not be immediately evident. I don't want to get into all the particulars of recent changes in the textile industry. Like I said, I have a video on that if you're interested in those smaller details. But long story short, near the end of the 20th century, the fast fashion industry had a notable boom alongside the increased prevalence of affordable synthetic fibers such as polyester. Before this, synthetic materials were not as common. Most vintage fashion is made of natural fibers like cotton, wool, or linen. According to a 2021 analysis on the clothing value chain, about 2/3 of all textile fibers are now synthetic, and more than half are now made from oil-based polyester. What's more, textile manufacturing has doubled, while the longevity of clothing has shown a notable decline. Other factors can affect quality, so even if you buy a 100% cotton shirt in the modern age, you may notice it does not hold up as well as compared to a more vintage item. Factors such as fiber strength, length, fineness, maturity, and many more things contribute to the overall quality of the textile, which helps explain this disparity. While I use clothing here as my primary example, I want to re-emphasize that in general, products have continued to decline in quality. Furniture is mostly particle wood now, which is a much lower quality. There has been a decrease in the nutritional value of food over the last 60 years. Even in-person experiences have cheapened. Wherever you look, it appears that the market has only progressed in a way that, outside of increased conveniences, provides consumers with less while maximizing profitability at the expense of the environment, consumer health, and product longevity. And again, much of this is attributable to what we have been conditioned to expect. I can almost feel a lot of you rolling your eyes when I said furniture is made of a lesser quality now. You're probably just like, you can just buy more at IKEA. That's because over time, the consumer culture has shifted from a quality focus to a quantity focus. This tendency was further amplified after the advent of the pandemic, which markedly altered consumer behaviors even more. Previous studies have indicated that lack of control affects individual consumption behavior and consumption patterns, especially impulse buying. This is because impulse buying can satisfy the psychological need of individuals to compensate for their sense of control. The COVID-19 pandemic reduced consumers' sense of control and increased anxiety, which in turn triggered impulse buying. For this reason, the need for accessible online options that satisfy the inclination to impulse buy brought about a new era of consumerism, which focused more on quelling psychological discomfort than filling a genuine need. The Temu "Shop Like a Billionaire" advertisement perfectly encapsulates what people wanted during this period: cheap and convenient online shopping that made them feel empowered to consume and consume a lot. But even as storefronts reopened, providing consumers a sense of normalcy, purchasing habits and company models remained forever altered. In many ways, the pandemic helped to accelerate a pre-existing aim to continue reducing production costs and increasing consumption frequency. As we have already seen, cultural shifts over long periods have slowly caused consumers to expect less. It doesn't take much imagination to see how a dramatic cultural shift happened after quarantine. Notably, e-commerce has continued to maintain its increased popularity. From this, consumption has become more centralized, with a few select digital corporate platforms taking the forefront. This has resulted in what is now known as the Amazon effect, which elevates expectations for speed, convenience, and personalized experiences on the wider market. Because of that, it has become increasingly difficult for smaller retailers to keep up because consumer expectations continue to demand a seamless and curated shopping experience. While convenient options like Amazon undoubtedly have their benefits, allowing large companies to continue driving consumer expectations permits them to claim market dominance and prioritize their bottom line, even if that means undermining consumer interests. Consequently, we are often left with fewer alternatives and become more accustomed to having our data collected and purchasing low-quality goods. And I want to take one more moment to re-emphasize the impact this has on small businesses. While it is easier more than ever now to put a product on the market, doing so is almost always accomplished through a large corporate platform. Consumers are much more demanding of small business owners. To receive support, small businesses are expected to have the highest quality, lowest price goods on the market. Otherwise, they may be subjected to harsh critique. It should be apparent by now that the state of the market is not by happenstance. Companies know exactly what they're doing. They've always intended to position themselves as the sole lifeline of now indispensable conveniences, subsequently undermining the consumer. Ownership has been replaced with endless subscriptions, and companies will get us to pay for them one way or another. If not through monthly fees to access media, then through planned obsolescence of our devices. The same is true for daily use goods, which have also reduced in quality over time. We are often forced to rebuy items that should be reliable but fail to stand the test of time. Fortunately, there is no shortage of replacement options available through an ergonomic e-commerce interface. In fact, their systems are so efficient, so well curated to your data, that they'll likely already have an optimal selection just for you. Understanding how we got here is not meant to point the proverbial finger. Instead, the aim is to contend with our circumstances and devise a plan towards a culture that actually values self-determination. And by self-determination, I mean an effortful reclaim of independence through personal competencies, market alternatives, and ethical standards that compound into a collective ethos to uplift consumer autonomy. Ideally, by establishing a base cultural philosophy instead of compartmentalized beliefs, we can direct the collective focus in a way that values consumer rights without disregarding individual needs. The growing pains of this process start at an individual level. In a society that encourages passivity and conflates convenience with progress, it will feel almost unnatural to accept personal effort as the first step to a meaningful cultural shift. But in place of reflexive defensiveness or posturing, I encourage honesty and self-accountability. I assume most of those who have made it this far in the video have already assessed the importance of these issues and believe a change is worth the effort. And if that is the case, the aspect of honesty should be seen as a way to establish realistic and personalized guidelines for moving forward. The fact is, not everyone has the same lifestyle, circumstances, or time. Therefore, an effective call to action must encourage people to reflect honestly on what sacrifices they are able and willing to make. For example, while some might specialize in exposing issues in the tech market and can refurbish devices, my strengths lie in my knowledge of clothing quality and my ability to DIY. Because I recognize that I have the time and ability to repair my clothing, I can prolong how they last instead of always having to buy something new. In this way, I identify my own methods to uplift a repair culture and discover a sense of self-efficacy. We should seek solidarity through a shared mindset that demonstrates the value of diversity of choice. Not everyone is willing to go without the same conveniences, but the point is not to encourage everyone to act or live in the same way. That's not realistic, nor is it productive. Instead, it's to demonstrate that alternatives should exist and that they have worth in the market. When people walk into a store and see DVDs, their first response should not be asking, well, who the fuck uses DVDs anymore? This restrictive mentality assumes consumption habits that don't maximize convenience lack merit, which is untrue. Some people like to stream, some people prefer physical. Both should be valid choices, neither a superior option. Not only does this apply to things that we buy, but also to things that we decide to repurpose. For instance, without an additional attachment, many new phones are only compatible with Bluetooth headphones, which have a limited battery life. In tandem with this, listening to music on YouTube or Spotify requires a subscription to remove ads. If I paid for a music streaming service, I would still need internet to play the songs. Even if I downloaded the music on my phone or through the streaming app itself, the songs would still be interrupted by texts, emails, updates, or phone calls unless I decide to turn them off. This actually influenced me to start using my old PSP as a dedicated music player. I can plug it in with an aux cord so I don't have to worry about Bluetooth battery. There are no ads, no interruptions, no Wi-Fi or updates needed. The interface is simple and intuitive. What's more is that I like having analog buttons to shuffle between songs without looking at the damn screen while driving or walking. Having a dedicated music device also saves my phone's battery. Granted, it's not perfect. Making a playlist is still a pain, and I don't have constant access to all the music in the world. However, in my opinion, there are enough reasons to do without those conveniences to justify having an MP3 player in 2025. Through these actions, I not only secure a sense of independence as a consumer by finding my own workaround when confronted with music streaming ads, but I also do my part to add diversity of demand. This helps to demonstrate to other consumers and subsequently, hopefully, companies that there are good reasons to choose an alternative. Therefore, there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all commodity that checks off all the boxes for everyone. At the end of it all, that is the point. You might not agree that physical is superior to digital or that MP3 players have a place in your life, but the goal is to figure out what you are willing to find an alternative for. What is a convenience you are willing to do without? What abilities or knowledge base can accentuate your autonomy as a consumer? The purpose of self-determination is to encourage everyone to construct personally tailored methods to attain self-sufficiency, or some level of self-sufficiency. By reflecting honestly on personal competence and seeking out market alternatives, our actions can grow into a potent cultural philosophy. In the path towards decentralization, we might sacrifice some conveniences, but the outcome will provide a greater sense of control and empowerment for consumers. Still, if you have thought about your circumstances and have determined that certain limitations prevent you from making any form of personal sacrifice, by all means, continue as you are. If you have reflected honestly, there is no need to convince me or anyone else that you cannot put in the effort. But saying it out loud like that, such excuses kind of sound like bullshit. don't they? A reoccurring theme on my channel is that effort is an awkward endeavor, but the only way to achieve success and make a change is to put in the work. Before something can feel natural, it must feel unnatural. And there's a vulnerability involved in this process because effort means caring, and caring exposes a certain sensitivity. When I first started making YouTube videos, I didn't quite know what I was doing, and at times I still falter and make mistakes. Despite that, I can still persevere and take pride in my improvements. One of the greatest strengths one can find is a sense of accomplishment when looking back at the clumsy process and seeing where it got you. With that said, I realized that any call for effort will be met with hesitation. In this case, some might feel it inherently displaces the blame onto consumers. Make no mistake, companies are the ones to blame here, not really consumers. However, at some point, one must wonder who will change first, businesses or consumers. It's like the leftist drama political sphere here on YouTube. Who's going to change first? The creators making the directionless, aimless, boring, derivative content, or the people watching it and complaining about it? I think it's well established by now that companies will exploit us however they can without regard for ethical considerations. Additionally, while technological advancements continue at a rapid pace to benefit corporate endeavors, social progress struggles to keep up. Despite this, companies do not hold all of the power. They thrive from and respond directly to our behaviors. Sure, they may have set the board and changed the rules, but we can still move our pieces in this oligarchic game for dominance. When we become passive, we become permissive. The fact is, we allow companies to get away with way too fucking much. However, for some, the concern is less about who is to blame and more about practical concerns regarding how they might contribute. I've mentioned subscription services and streaming often in this video, and the alternative suggested may not be sufficient for those without time or a sizable budget. From this, subscriptions are the only time-efficient option with the lowest upfront costs. Some don't have the resources to collect physical. Even if they did, you need a player of some kind, and physical formats take up space you might not have. All those concerns are genuine and valid. I could continue to list examples of hopes of quelling every possible problem. However, the fact is that there is no way to cover every base and ensure all suggested alternatives consider every limitation. Such a task is fucking impossible, which is why I have emphasized the importance of diversity and personal tailoring regarding those considerations. Therefore, some level of creativity would help one navigate the landscape of alternative options. No one understands your life or abilities better than you. So when certain suggestions don't suit your situation, it should not be taken as an attack, but as an opportunity to add more to the conversation. What I want to encourage is not a collective lifestyle, but a shared mindset that leads to meaningful action. We gotta be critical of the conveniences we are told that we need. In doing so, we can begin to see alternatives as having validity, even if they do not suit our personal needs or desires. By facilitating diversity in choice, we broaden our options without feeling guilty when picking a more conventional route. With that said, some might genuinely want to escape the confines of conventionality, but struggle with knowing where to start. This is where I believe collaboration finds its strength. When individuals with shared interests and goals cooperate, our personal struggles can potentially spark a larger dialogue. For this reason, another aspect of honesty lies in assessing if concerns are being made in good faith. There are those, especially online, who will always think of rebuttal, not to provide additional perspective, but to contradict, for the sole purpose of contradicting. I suspect this is because the internet has encouraged a reflexive contrarian tendency. Being bombarded with heaps of information and being encouraged to hold strong opinions about everything makes refuting almost habitual. Those who would disregard every alternative, deny any avenue for sacrifice, and stonewall collaboration, I encourage you to consider why you are so reluctant and why you're a piece of shit. While I can appreciate the need for counter arguments, there comes a point where the endless toggle is a fucking hindrance and an annoyance. As we march forward at full speed toward a hyper-surveilled, algorithmically curated world, I think it's worth reflecting on where we were and how we got here. Only a few decades ago, even though the concept of convenience was very different then from what it is now, there was an expected element of quality, ownership, and longevity. In many ways, Clippy is an appropriate symbol for what has been lost. As Rossman pointed out in his video, your Adobe subscription will be terminated if you miss a payment, and your access to the software will be removed. However, you can still boot up a computer from the late 90s and access Microsoft Word to see Clippy's goofy-eyed face, ready to help you without reaping your data. That is a level of ownership, privacy, and longevity that is almost unheard of in the modern age. Largely, yeah, companies are to blame for this shift. Though they didn't have the means to do so during that period, there was always an intent to boost profits at any cost, even at the expense of their consumers. Over time, we have become so accustomed to the conveniences they offer. Now we trust select brands to continue putting our best interests at heart, while they incrementally condition us to be more permissive of their malignant practices. And of course, with the advent of AI, it should be no surprise that historically exploitative companies wish to utilize this tool in the most opportunistic way possible. Meanwhile, legislation regarding consumer rights struggles to maintain traction. All of this considered, much of my focus has been locked on the state of our culture. What we give is what we get. So if we decide to put in no effort, we will receive no reward. I think it's time for us to acknowledge our complacency, our reluctance to be critically engaged, and our hesitance in building self-reliance. Fear of effort has stagnated us so much and has made us resent any meaningful self-reflection or improvement. And then what frequently follows is an endless slew of excuses displacing blame and ensuring nothing changes. The culture we should hope to build is not one based on absolutes. We should not seek extreme convenience nor extreme exertion, but instead have a reasoned balance between the two. But I fear that the prevailing belief is that efficiency is the only reasonable method to progress society. In that sense, any critique against recent advancements is seen as radical. In actuality, the changes in our circumstances is what's radical. Consider this: despite how new the widespread use of generative AI is, we're all acting like it has existed for decades. We so readily tether our lives to AI because it is one of the greatest modern advancements in convenience. The hope was to secure more time and a better quality of life by reducing production demands. But advancement only breeds increased expectations for output, increased competition, and increased specialization to stay relevant to new market demands. And so, the cycle continues. The circling pattern of progress forces us to work harder to tread increasingly rapid and unpredictable shifts. So it's become clear that our understanding of progress is actually reductive. We might solve the problems of efficiency with technology, but the cultural issues still persist. At what point are we going to break the illusion of what we're doing is working? Will we admit there is a problem when we lose all of our time, relinquish all sense of ownership, after we surrender all meaningful human contributions? The first step was collective recognition of discontentment. The next one is assessing our current circumstances, where we're heading, and what we want progress to actually look like. Once we've come to appreciate that there is more than one way to advance our culture, we can take the needed steps towards worthwhile developments. But this can only happen if we have active participants within the culture, not passive consumers swallowing the new corporate bottom line. Rossman encouraged the development of a repair culture, and to me, this means enhancing autonomy through honesty and effort. Instead of giving into the reflexive tendency to push off responsibility, it is more productive to identify sacrifices and contributions one can make on an individual level to enhance the consumer culture. Certainly, personal limitations might hinder this process, which is why a tailored approach is a much more appropriate way to guide the movement. In part, this consideration helps to foster a healthy consumer culture by appreciating diverse needs. Additionally, it shifts us away from the current tendency towards complacency by bestowing some level of responsibility on the the individual to determine where they might reasonably contribute to such improvements. Collaboration is invaluable in that aim, facilitating the creation of varied solutions to both common and distinct problems. If nothing else is taken away from this conversation, it is the radical notion that effort is needed to shift our culture. Sustained complacency from increased conveniences through centralization will not improve our quality of life in the long term. We have to engage with advancements critically to employ their use responsibly, but that requires, above all else, the willingness to join the conversation, the faculty to turn words into action, and the discipline to sustain meaningful habits.